Well, I appreciate you doing this. I just barely walked over from the courthouse. They have finally reached the pool of 42.
Okay. They got there, huh?
They got
Good.
there. Then they're going to strike it down to 18 tomorrow, and opening arguments begin Monday. 3 years ago, when we were in Hawaii, did you ever think we would end up here 3.5 years later?
I didn't think it would take quite 3.5 years, frankly, Nate, but apparently it does. The wheel grinds slow, and boy, I see from your posts it continues to grind pretty slow. The whole question of this long dissertation on whether or not certain people would be allowed to testify or not. I'm sure a lot of disappointment for JJ's grandparents.
Yeah, yeah. They, of course, Kay gets to be in the courtroom, and Larry can go in the courtroom, but just not for other testimony or once he's testified. So maybe they'll move him to the top of the list or something.
Hard to know. I guess there are strategies involved on both sides, I'm sure.
Yeah. I want to go back when you first heard about this case. What made it so interesting to you back in December of 2019?
Well, because you got a whiff of what may have actually happened here. It seemed too bizarre to be true, and yet all the indications were it was. And the more we found out, the more bizarre it became. So it was like a string that you could not help but follow. And indeed, it did get stranger and stranger. There are still so many elements of this story that we have not had a chance to cover simply because there's so much of it, you know?
Yeah, this story does not have an elevator 10-second pitch when somebody asks about it.
It does not. No, indeed.
So it's taken you and I, but you to Hawaii, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, all sorts of states, all sorts of characters. Is there anything about it that sticks out to you as you've been to all these places and met with law enforcement and learned stuff that as you're putting this all together?
You know, along the way, there have been just a lot of shocking things that we have discovered. And I think probably the thing that sticks to me most of all, though, is that helicopter ride you and your folks took on the day that the police finally raided the house, found the graves in the backyard. It's kind of an unforgettable moment.
Yeah, it was unforgettable. I honestly wasn't expecting that there would be bodies buried in that yard. I thought, oh, they're going to see some stuff or look for evidence, but there was the key that they answered the question. Do you also remember when you came out to Idaho and we went to that storage unit?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that was something. And then finding that video, the pat on the bum kind of lives in the memory as well.
Yeah, the surveillance footage that showed Lori visiting with Chad, we assume Chad, and him touching her rear end. I remember when the owner of that storage unit opened up the garage. I think you said it was eerie to see all of the belongings of those kids who at that time we didn't know where they were.
Right, and the possibility existed that they were alive, but I certainly didn't think so. And to see this stuff piled up in that storage room, it was just so sad. It was really a moment of great pathos.
Yeah. So, any idea? I know you don't know this. No one really knows. But any idea how this ends? We have Lori, of course, who's starting a trial, who has insisted she go to trial and wants to plow through this. Then you have Chad, who's waived his trial. I mean, do you see maybe him turning on her or her on him? How do you foresee it?
You know, you could just imagine what the lawyers are going over in their minds. And if I were Chad's lawyer, I'd be thinking, well, he's going to have to testify against Lori. And if you're Lori, you're going to blame Chad for the whole thing, and the trial will help you do that. So that's going to be the interesting thing to observe. How are they going to spread the blame for these terrible events, or even are they going to admit that there were terrible events to blame people for? I don't know. The question will just hangs out there. Is the delusion still something that they're in the middle of or not?
Yeah. You think Lori will take the stand?
You know, with a lot of people, you get a pretty clear indication. whether there's a narcissistic tendency in the personality, and there does seem to be in Lori, but I somehow I doubt it.
Yeah. I will say that Dateline has been a popular topic of conversation with the judge and the jurors over the past few days, Keith. He has asked, so they completed these questionnaires. Around 2,000 people sent in these questionnaires. They narrowed it down. They put them in pools of 15. They're calling them in. And then when they do individual questioning, the judge asked each and every one, among all the questions, have you seen the Dateline about this story?
Which one?
Yeah, I know. Which 9 hours or 10 hours? And then you did the podcast, which hit #1 for a long time on the charts. Why are people so interested in this case?
Well, it contains all the elements of a case that fascinates people. There's there are the unbelievable behaviors, of course, but also the unbelievable beliefs and the strange lead up to it. And Chad obviously plays the supporting role in this drama, and yet it's the writing that he contributed to it that seems to be at the heart of the odd beliefs, the idea that you can cross back and forth across the threshold between life and death, and therefore it's okay to be offing people right, left, and center. So who knows who first decided to take the actions? There are still some questions we don't have the answers to, and I think that that's part of the fascination here. Sure. In addition to which, characters along the way, and I don't want to malign anybody, but some very strange things have happened involving people who are associated with Lori and Chad.
Yeah. Makes you wonder what would happen if Alex Cox were still alive, her brother.
Right. It certainly does. And I'm sure that a lot of blame will be thrown in his direction by both parties.
Well, in addition to keeping up with all of this story, this case, you also have...
And I've tuned into your broadcast as often as I can.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to talk about, though, the podcast, The Girl in the Blue Mustang, changing topics here a little bit. All the episodes will be available starting next Tuesday, but you can get all of them up till now, or most of them at least. What's this story about?
This is a story I started covering over 20 years ago. Well, actually, that's not exactly right. We started picking up the story about 15 years ago, but the case occurred back at the turn of the century, very beginning of the year 2000, where a young woman who'd been given a brand new shiny blue Mustang as a graduation/Christmas gift had gone with a friend of hers to take part in a music video in downtown LA, and then drove back to the high desert where they both lived, and where Michelle O'Keefe, the victim in this story, had stored her Mustang until they got back from the shoot. She got into the car, and shortly thereafter, she was dead. She was shot by somebody. And the only person who the police believed was around was the security guard, who supposed to be an unarmed security guard. But the mystery evolves from there, and it's one that has preoccupied me off and on for many years now. And some of the events that have taken place and continue to take place, because it's not over yet, are truly bizarre. The strangest things you ever heard. But strange things happen in law and justice all the time.
Yeah, you know that better than anybody. And you have sure spent a lot of time in Idaho with the University of Idaho murders, Moscow.
Yes. Yes, well, program on that coming up fairly soon, I think.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Keith, I got to say to all of you watching that Keith is one of the nicest guys. There's this stigma among local reporters that the national guys swoop in and they're arrogant and cocky.
That's us for sure.
Well, let me tell you, a few years ago, before all the Daybell stuff broke, Keith was in Idaho Falls doing a story on the Angie Dodge murder. And you probably don't remember this, Keith, because I found...
Oh, sure.
I found your email address somewhere. I didn't even know if it was like your real one. I sent you an email and said, hey, I'd love to chat with you about why you're in town. And Keith wrote back and said, sure, when do you want to do it? And I said, oh my gosh, Keith Morrison this afternoon. And I'm expecting him to come with a team of 10 people and have a driver. And you pulled up all by yourself and came in.
It's a lot of fun. Your group are a bunch of very nice people.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry, what was that, Keith?
I said, and you at the head of it.
Oh, well, thank you. And then one more thing. When my daughter, Emmy, 7 questions with Emmy,
Yes.
you were her first. She tells me all the time. And just today she said, please tell Keith hi. Keith was the first famous person to say yes to her. And because he said yes, she was with Mary J. Blige and Drew Barrymore just a few days ago, Keith.
She is an amazing young woman, and it's an honor to have been her first.
Well, I just thank you for being so cordial and real, and for coming on here. Of course, we'll stay on top of all of the updates from this case for 7 more weeks, and maybe if it gets huge enough or there's some big bombshell, we might see you out here.
Yeah, are you kidding? Of course, if something happens, we're there. Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's going to happen. The question, one of the issues is this is not a televised trial, as you know, which presents a bit of a roadblock for us, but we shall see. We're watching carefully, and if we can swoop in at some point and do another program, I'm sure we will.
Well, you might get mobbed at the courthouse like that first time.
No.
Keith, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate this. I just mentioned off the cuff the other night when I was doing this, someone said, is Keith Morrison in Idaho? And I said, no, not right now, but maybe I can talk to him. And all the comments, yes, Keith. So,
well, say hello to everybody from me.
I will.